Okay, we are going to jump right in. It's been a couple weeks, which has been good because a lot of us have been out, so we're kind of all coming back together, which means we probably all need a little refresher, don't we? Tashana, did you get a sheet? Tashana?
Sure.
Okay, do you want a full packet since you haven't been here?
Yes.
All right. I'll give you a full packet.
Cotton ball clipped to your shirt.
I know the cotton ball.
We don't have to do that.
It's my lucky rabbit foot.
Are you giving out a full packet because there's more than I may have made?
Yep. Let me get you one.
I received the first several, but I know I missed one or two. Because I was in Washington. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take this then.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, it's in there. Okay, so yes, I do have a rabbit's foot. New camera in here because we're going to start recording this class for people who are, when they miss, everyone asks me for recording, and I'm trying to get my cell phone out, and last time I ran out of space in the middle of so it was recording like 8K though, so, and my phone felt like it was going to blow up. It was so hot. So anyway, we are doing this, but don't worry about that. It's just there. We are talking about gender roles, and this is one of the questions that was asked for the class, and for weeks previous, we dealt with the egalitarian position. Can anyone give me a little bit of a summary of what the egalitarian position is, essentially? So male and female are equal, which that's both views. Let's make that clear. Equal in value, right? Equal in value, but what? They are also, so the E's are equal in value and function or role, okay? And so depending on which egalitarian you talk to, once again, there are differences even in all the camps, but majority of them believe that God created the earth where male and female were equal, and then at the fall was the consequences, and a lot of the consequences in Genesis 3 where it tells women you shall desire your husband or to be over your husband was not God decreeing something, but just showing what would be the natural result of the fall. God never wanted male and female differing function or role, but that's the way the world and history would play out, okay? And then when Jesus comes, he comes in Galatians 5 is kind of their big verse. He no longer male nor female, right? Slave or free, Jew or Gentile, we are all now one in Christ. So essentially, they believe that Christ came and redeemed that initial relationship between men and women, but culture still had to be played out in the New Testament. Meaning there were still cultural things that you couldn't just change the system like that. You couldn't just flip it on its head without causing an uproar like in Corinth or in Ephesus. And so you're still having to deal with people. Though Jesus tried to make it whole and pure, you're still having to deal with imperfect people. So if this is going to harm your relationship, don't allow culture, right, to, don't just throw it in the face of culture because you're free to do whatever, 1 Corinthians 11, right? But not all things are expedient. So that's essentially, once again, we went through, 4 pages of notes. We didn't even finish all of it because what I figured is in the Complementarian, we're going to have to go through some of those verses anyway. And so we didn't really finish all of the egalitarian stuff, but what I did was I just incorporated it into when we start talking about complementarian. So complementarians, what would you assume is their position? So you still have this. You still have equal in value, okay? This remains the same. But complementing functions. I'm going to reword it that way. They are complementing functions. because as I've been studying this, it's kind of becoming more and more and more. You learn more every time you open up, the book. Galatians 5 does say we become one, right? But even the oneness of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit had what? Very distinct roles. The Father does not do what the Son does, and the Son did not do what the Father did, and the Spirit had something different, though there are interlap. Like with men and women, there are interlap, but there are still complementing functions. And so I kind of want to start with, the Bible will talk about, first of all, nature itself teaches us this in 1 Corinthians 11. And once again, and the most basic thing that was established in the garden before the fall was what? A husband and a wife coming together to make a child. Would you say that those functions are exactly the same and can be reversed? Well, depending on the society I guess you're living in, because in today's world, a male apparently can have a child, and a woman, well, we're not going to get into that, but we're all reasonable, hopefully reasonable, functioning adults. That even in nature itself, and Paul will bring that up several different times, okay? Nature itself teaches us these things, okay? So, and the egalitarians kind of come at that. We talked about that a little bit. Well, there are some animal species that the male does carry children. The seahorse, is that right? So, but they didn't have a whole biology textbook to look at when you're looking at nature itself, the things that they knew, right? I'm sure you can find species that there are species where the female eats the male after they're done having babies. Are we going to? So, all right, okay. I mean, that may be a good system. I don't know. It could solve some issues. So, complementarians differ on this as well. I am of the complementarian position, and I told you that from the beginning, that God always designed, even in the garden, the differing functions. Okay? And the fall was that it put those differing functions at odds with each other for the first time. In the garden, it worked purposely and harmoniously. I've been working out for 10 minutes. Purposely and harmoniously, and at the fall, one of the consequences was now all of a sudden things that were at harmony, things that nobody would have cared about, things that everything functioned together, right? The animal world, even the creatures in the sea, they all complemented one another, and it got distorted. And so instead of following your role, even what we see in today's world, there will be times where men become docile and do nothing and do not step up into their leadership role and their male headship role. And there are women who will take that and take on the leadership role. And some families even like it that way, but that does not mean that it was designed that way. And so Christians and those who are following God, we're always going to have to fight with and control the fact that God designed males to be have headship, right? And women were to, in a sense, submit. But there's even more to that, because we are to submit to one another. So it's not just a one statement answers all the questions, okay? But I'm just kind of giving you the overview as we get into this. So when we get into Genesis chapter 1, and they bring up the fact in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27 through 28, and we talked about this a little bit, that God created man in his image, male and female, he created them, and he gave them dominion over the earth. Okay? He gave them dominion. So right at the beginning, who's given dominion? Both male and female. Okay? So we're both given dominion. And so they say, look, equal value, equal role, in the beginning, both had dominion. Well, in Genesis 2, where it actually gives you the order by which how God, remember Genesis 1, and the Bible does this all the time, it'll give you a general, God created this, male and female. Genesis 2 is actually specifically how he did it. And Genesis 2 says he created who first? Adam was created first, and actually who did he give before Eve ever came along? the right to name all of the created world and have dominion over naming. And it says, whatever Adam names them, that will be their name. And so God gave Adam dominion in a sense, and then Eve came along to be the helpmeet. Now, this does not mean, right, and we talked about this a little bit, this word help is not necessarily a subordinate rule or a subordinate position, right? You're just sometimes we say, oh, she's the help. Like if you're talking about maybe a nanny or something, she's just kind of an auxiliary part of this relationship who really doesn't matter. That's not what this word means. The word help actually means suitable. Because remember when Adam was naming all of the animals, what's the one thing that he figured out? There was nobody who was suitable for him, okay? And so, and this word meet literally means to come to the aid. Most of the time in the Bible, do you know who is our meet? Who comes to our meet, our aid? It is God. This same Hebrew word is usually used for God coming and rescuing and helping us, okay? So the word itself doesn't mean, and that's why a lot of complementarians take this word and say, here's how I know women are subordinate because they're just the help. That's not built within the Hebrew word. That's an English word that we have put into this Hebrew word. It does not carry that weight, okay? Now, there are times this conjunction, and I have an example in Ezekiel Chapter 18, where an army officer was calling one of his subordinates to come and be his helpmate, but it's also of God coming to be his helpmate. So the word itself does not, without context, show subordination or not, hierarchy or not within itself. Context would determine the meaning of that, okay? So, but there are a lot of complementarians, and here's some differences, who actually believe what the egalitarians believe, that God did create Adam and Eve equal in function and role, and the fall is the result. But I think they have a lot of issues later that they can't really wrestle with, and they're basically this in theory, but wanting to be this in function. Okay? So I'm going to hold to God always designed it this way. Nature itself teaches it, okay? So Genesis 2, we went through some of that. We spent a lot of time on those two, when we were going through the egalitarian position. And I did a lot of rebuttals actually while we were going through it. But before I move on, are there any questions, at least onto what this so far hasn't really proven anything? It's just you got to create the foundation in Genesis, right? What does the word Genesis mean? The beginnings are the place where we need to start, because Jesus is going to go back here, Paul's going to go back here, Peter's going to go back here to actually establish what I believe to be a complementarian position, okay? Now, you can get a lot of trouble in today's world by even suggesting that women are in some way in a inferior, which that's a bad word to me because I don't believe inferior comes to the forefront at all. Because if it is, then Jesus, who submitted to the Father, was inferior to him, and we know that he wasn't. Submission is something that Jesus himself lived out, so it's not necessarily something that is an inferior role, okay? But this can be abused and has been abused. All right, and I think as we go through our lesson, we're going to realize that God never designed to be abused either. It was meant to go actually really well functioning together. Okay? So, any questions? All right, I've got a lot of other stuff here. Created order, we're going to get into some of that. 1 Timothy 2:13, one of the reasons why created order matters. Okay, so let's just talk about that for a moment. We don't really in our society have a whole lot to say about firstborn stuff anymore, right? Firstborn kind of really doesn't matter. You know, they're the ones everybody doesn't like, in my opinion, right? Because I'm obviously not the firstborn.
Where were you Wednesday when I had to teach this in Greece?
I was not feeling well. Yeah, so created order, firstborn. in the Bible? Is that a big concept that is constantly being talked about over and over and over and over and over again? Firstborn in ancient Near East thought had a double portion, but what I want to emphasize, it had nothing to do with privilege. It had everything, it had everything to do with responsibility. Okay? It had nothing to do with privilege. The reason you got more was so that you could support more people. It wasn't like you were getting a double check so that you could, spend more money than someone else. You actually now had to take on the care of more people. And this is where we get the idea of the Kinsmen Redeemer. Right? Remember, go to Ruth chapter 3. Let's kind of jump right there. Who can give me a quick summary of the story of Ruth? What's going on in Ruth's day? Who is Ruth? What is she?
She's the daughter-in-law of Naomi, I believe, is that right?
Yep. Okay.
All the husbands died, and she goes back to her with her religion.
Okay. So she stays with Naomi. She promises to go back with Naomi. Her God will be my God, right? And I will take care of you. Well, when she moves to a Jewish society, what does she realize about women's ability to take care of themselves? You are dependent, okay, in a sense. There wasn't, well, we're not going to go there right now. But anyway, while Ruth is out in the fields working, remember, in Boaz's fields, what does he recognize about her? Something's different about her, right? He wants to take care of her, but who does he have to go through first? In Ruth chapter 3, look at this. So it's actually Ruth chapter 4, I'm sorry. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate, sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. He took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. So now they're bringing this before the elders, okay, of the city. He said to the Redeemer, the person who was supposed to, Ruth and Naomi should not be out working in the fields. When they got back, they should have been what? They should have been redeemed. And what that means is we're going to see here in a moment. He said to the Redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech." So being the Redeemer meant you were higher up on the patriarchal system where it was first your responsibility, because he would have had a double portion, to take care of those who were under that family's kinsmen, okay? So the Redeemer was always the kind of the patriarch. All right. So I thought I would tell you of it, inform you that, hey, they're out working in the fields, and Naomi's now having to sell the last of her land just to survive. What are you doing about it? That's essentially what we're talking about, okay? So I thought I'd tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. So he's putting them to task. If you're not going to do it, you're going to have to let everybody know why you're not doing it right here and right now, okay? If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me, that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it. It meant they were the patriarch. It always has to go to them first. It's their responsibility. And I have come after you. So he would be next in line. And he said, I will redeem it. If you don't, I will. Then Boaz said, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, though, you also acquire Ruth. You see, responsibility. He had to use his own money to go buy off Elimelech's land that she was trying to sell, and he had to go purchase it. That's why he had a double portion and would have had more, so he had the means to be able to do these types of things. And the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, okay? And this isn't the only time of that. Like, if your brother's wife dies, the oldest brother was supposed to do what first? The oldest one who wasn't married. If there was not a married one, the oldest one not married was supposed to marry his brother's wife. Redeem. So this is a concept they're familiar with. And firstborn had that responsibility first. And what I'm getting at is, and we looked at this a couple weeks ago, who was blamed for the fall, Adam or Eve? In Romans chapter 5, who does God hold responsible and say through whom all the sin came into the world? Through Adam. Who ate of the tree first? Eve. Yet, the responsibility fell on whom? On Adam.
I just have a question about that, because that lesson I had to teach was
Yeah.
first they tried to say, well, was Adam there next to her when Satan was tempting her? Did he know? Or did Adam fail his responsibility by going ahead and letting her, tempt him into eating?
Probably both.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think the way it reads, Adam was there, right? But he allowed it to continue, okay? But still, Eve took the first bite. So the first sin was committed not by man, in the sense of male, but by the female. And yet Adam is held responsible for it. It's not that she has no consequences that come from it, but at least the New Testament talks about how sin came through the male, okay? And that a second male, like Adam, would come and redeem. That's why he is the firstborn among what? Many brethren. That has more than a connotation that he was just the first person who died and was resurrected, but he was our firstborn. He has the right and the responsibility to redeem us. Think about Jesus coming, and him being the firstborn, him being our elder brother, right? That's what Hebrews talks about. He had a responsibility to redeem us. Go read Hebrews chapter 2. He had the responsibility. He had to come in the form of man. He had to come in the form of man to redeem us because he had that responsibility, all right? So, once again, Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 13, he's going to say, why does males have the authority over women? Because of created order. Adam was created first. And Paul doesn't explain that. He just says it. Adam was created first. Therefore, his responsibility is teaching with authority. 1 Corinthians 11 says the same thing. When women are praying and prophesying, right, they got to pray with their head covered or else they bring dishonor to their husbands, because God is the head over Christ, who's head over the male, right, the husband, and husband is what? Is the head over his wife. Questions, comments so far?
I got a question. So you're saying we should all have our heads covered?
No. We talked a little bit about that in 1 Corinthians 11. That was a Corinth problem, because even later in verse 16, he says, if you have any other custom, if this custom entangles you, yes. Huh?
It was more of a custom thing, like a tradition thing of their customs, and it's not really...
Yeah, because Paul actually says that no other church has this custom of the head covering. Okay? No other is a...
Same one where you're supposed to be quiet and ask your husband, right?
That's going to come a couple chapters later, and we're going to talk about that as we keep going. Okay? So one of the things that the egalitarians bring up, and I find it interesting, so I'm kind of skipping over some stuff, I'm bringing some things in together, but you have all these notes. Jesus' view of women. Remember when we're in the egalitarian position, and they spent a lot of time about Jesus' treatment of women. The fact of the matter is that he actually allowed them to study under a rabbi. They were able to be disciples. They were given the responsibility to preach the first gospel, to tell the first gospel story. Remember, Mary and Martha were told to go tell the disciples and all who were meeting in Mary's house about the resurrected Jesus. And that, supporting women, leading women, supported and funded. And it was interesting when one of my friends, I was listening to a podcast, one of my friends, kind of challenged this. And he said, well, why didn't Jesus, if he was really kind of establishing and really wanted to nail the coffin home that women were supposed to be apostles and have authority over men, why did he not make some of these women, why did he not make them an apostle? And so then they backtrack, and this guy spent 40 minutes talking about how Jesus went against culture, raised women up out of culture, right? Combated culture, was willing to break traditions, and social barriers. And then he said, well, Jesus would not have had any respect if he would have broken that tradition, that social tradition. That would have been going too far. And a friend was kind of like, that's weak sauce. That's iffy, because Jesus did not care. He broke political. He didn't care who it made mad. He went on Sabbath purposely to stir the pot, to teach proper teaching. Okay? So we have a system where Jesus selected 12, and even in Acts, if he was going to do it, when they were selecting a new apostle, it also had to be a male who was there at all and witnessed all the things of Jesus. Not even a female's name was put up. Why is that, right? That's interesting. Okay? So we have to create a theology that allows women... Thanks, honey. See, this is why women don't teach. We have to create a system that allows women to teach in some capacity, because we have women who were prophesying, who were teaching, who were able to share the gospel. But also have a system that realizes that there is a time and a place that is, what we're going to be, this is where we're going to go, is inappropriate. You understand that? So, I have nothing against women being educated in the Word of God. I recommend that. I recommend that women share the gospel with people. I recommend that women are able to teach what they believe in to others. But there's a place in which we're going to see Jesus established and the apostles established where it would not be appropriate, where it would be taking the authority over of a man. That make sense? Okay, so let's jump right in for any questions on Jesus' treatment of women and him not selecting them as apostles. Once again, none of this so far is kind of slam dunk stuff, right? Old Testament has places where women, all of a sudden they take, they're women who are judges. We got to answer all those questions, but I won't be able to answer it all. Right? Are there exceptions? Yes. Are there things that happen? Yes. Can I explain them all? No. But can I know for sure what God desires? It's kind of like the whole idea of Moses writing a certificate of marriage or a divorce. Jesus, when he's questioned, when they say, hey, Moses wrote the certificate, was he right or not? He goes, why did Moses have to write it in the first place? Why are we in this situation? You had a hardness of heart. Something was going wrong. Men weren't treating women the way they ought to have been treated. Go back and read why they had to write a certificate of divorce. Is men were divorcing women, passing them around, and then when they wanted them back, just went and said, you know what, you're mine. And so Moses says, no. To protect women, he wrote the certificate of divorce so women go, no, you put me away. You have no right or claim to me anymore. It was a protection, but Jesus goes back to the beginning. But in the beginning, it was not so. So there are times and places in the Old Testament, right, where even David acts as a priest. But who's around to act like? No priest that is faithful is around to act like it. Is it okay? Is it normative? No. Like when David ate the showbread, remember? And Jesus brings it up. Is he normally supposed to eat the showbread? No. But was there a time and a place and a circumstance where that had to take place and God didn't condemn it? Yeah. So we're not going to be talking about you could name 1,000 exceptions. What if you're over in Germany and the men, nobody will get up and lead and women, okay, there are probably cases and exceptions to the rule, but we're going to be sticking, at least in what I plan to do, to the rule. So let's go to 1 Corinthians 14. To me, this is the biggest, where both the egalitarians and the complementarians have to figure out what in the world's going on. Because I'm going to tell you, it's a problem for everybody. It is a problem for everybody. Right? The whole fact of the matter where it says women are not even to speak in church. Well, we have very good Bible classes in here, and women give a lot of good comments. Have they broken 1 Corinthians 14, 36 through following? That's what we're going to talk about. So, here's first 1 Corinthians 11. We do have women who are praying and prophesying. Okay? But everything leading up to 1 Corinthians 11 and verse 17 is seems to be in a general overall, these things are going on. We're not told where they're going on, when they're going on, but Paul is going to start honing in on the fact of when you are together as a church, when you are together as the ecclesia, the rules change. And he even starts in verse 17 after he talks about the male-female headship. Look at verse 17. And now he's changing lanes. That's why I believe 1 Corinthians 11, the first 16 verses actually attach better to the 1 Corinthians 10, the end of chapter 10, than it does in chapter 11. Chapter 11 should start in chapter 11, verse 17, because he's now changing to assembly only. But in the following instructions, I do not commend you, because when you come together, it is for better or for worse. And he's going to go on to talk about when you come together as a church and you're partaking of the Lord's Supper. You're dishonoring the Lord by the way you partake in the Lord's Supper, okay? So I'm not going to go through, that's our study. Then in chapter 12, he's going to talk about the spiritual gifts and how they are used in the assembly and in the body. And we're fighting over, well, who's got the better gift? I can speak in tongues, you can't, right? You know, you just imagine like the high school play yard, right? Well, maybe it should be middle school. A lot of my high school ends up with those same problems. And then we get into 1 Corinthians 14. And now, once again, I believe we're still in the assembly, and here is why. If you don't know where I am, I don't either. We're on the very last page, and we're going to be looking at, well, very last page, right at the top. Look at verse 19, 23, and 26 of 1 Corinthians 14. He says, nevertheless, in church, literally in the ecclesia, I would rather speak 5 words with my mind in order to instruct other than 10,000 words in a tongue. Look at verse 23. If therefore the whole church comes together and speaks in tongues, and outsiders or unbelievers enter. So once again, they didn't have church buildings. Kind of like when Jesus, there was a lot of times when they met together as disciples, people were walking by and hearing, because they weren't closed off in a building, where nobody could come in. They had to meet. A lot of times homes couldn't even fit. I mean, you look at first century homes, you had to be a very rich person to fit even this size group in one building. So a lot of times there was overflow. A lot of times when Jesus was teaching, they were outside the house, but they were all listening. And people could hear. So when unbelievers are hearing, speaking in tongues and different languages going on, and people, but what we're going to see is almost like a riot, because people were talking over each other. People were getting prophecies, and they were trying to, no, I want to talk about mine. I just got one from God. No, I got one from God. I got a tongue, and I got a gift. And it's just, and unbelievers are hearing it, and they're entering into the assembly. He says, will they not say that you are out of your minds? Right? And then look also at verse 26. What then, brothers, when you come together, each one has a hymn, a lesson, a revelation, a tongue, interpretation. Let all things be done for building up. So he is specifically speaking about when they came together to worship together. They were singing earlier. They were already messing up breaking the bread. Okay? So we are talking about an assembly of believers who are coming together as the ecclesia. So that helps us in our context, because even in 1 Corinthians 14, when we get later, women are not to speak where? In church. The word church is just ecclesia, but that word became the gathering of the saints, when you came together, women were not to speak. They were to be silent. So we're speaking about an assembly. 1 Corinthians 11, to me, cannot then be the assembly where they were praying and prophesying, because Paul won't say one time, hey, yeah, women are praying and prophesying, and it's okay as long as they don't take over their, as long as they are remaining in subject to their husbands. But now, 3 chapters later, in the same letter, I want them to be silent in the church. Well, how can they be praying and prophesying over here and be silent over here? Right? Why didn't he just tell them in the beginning, hey, you shouldn't even be praying and prophesying? If we were talking about, so he's obviously talking about two different contexts. Women were giving prophecies, and I'm hoping they were going out, like in the book of Acts, like with Priscilla and Aquila, even Priscilla and Aquila. The Bible is very specific to mention that when Apollos was speaking error, who went and taught him the way of truth more perfectly? He took him aside. Priscilla and Aquila were a part of the teaching of Apollos the way more perfectly. So there is a context in which women ought to be teaching, ought to be prophesying, ought to be praying. And I'm not going to get into when and where and what. That's not really the purpose right here, but it's obviously not the assembly in the same way, because that's what we're going to get into right now. Okay, questions or comments? Do you see kind of where I'm going with all this? All right, so let's start reading in verse 26. I've already read that, but let's look at verse 27 now. If any speak in a tongue, let there be only one or two, or at most three, and each man in turn. Let someone interpret. So if you were to speak in tongue, you also had to have someone who is doing what? Interpreting. But if there is no one to interpret, let each of them keep silent, so that women are not the only ones who are to be kept silent in the church. Is he saying that a male, if they have the gift of tongue and they have no interpreter, they are to keep silent at all times in the church? Or is it a type of silence that he's talking? Is it a type of speech? That's what we're going to get into, because actually the Greek word that's going to be say they are not to speak in church is actually the word to make a declaration. It's not that they, I've really got an itch, can I go to the bathroom, but I can't say it because, right? It's speaking about a declaration. It's a type of speech. And all these people are about to be silented with a type of speech. Okay? So we're going to pick up that next.